Good evening, everybody. I hope you're doing well. Um, so, Johannes put a recent interview out with his college professor, Ivo Di Gennaro. And you may have heard me in previous videos kind of talk about his work that is called The Principles of Philosophy. Um, Such a unassuming title, isn't it? um, so he has him on for an interview, and I have to say that I've listened to this 2-hour conversation like 4 times, and I'm probably going to listen to it 20 more times because it struck me. It just struck me so much. I kind of feel like Johannes should provide therapy after for the people who listen to this video. So there's some things that um, they get into basically that really gets under, and it is a very dark, in a certain way. There's like an ecstatic darkness to it, um, and there's a releasement, right? There's a sense of release without diminishing the darkness, right? And there's a way that they do this, right? That Ivo Di Gennaro does this, and I think he's gifted in being able to think, genuinely think, right? What is being today, um, in a way that gives access to the truth of, I would say, being's withdrawal, the abandonment of being, and really looking at it, really looking, really seeing it in a rigorous way. So I'm uh, Johannes couldn't talk for a couple of weeks, so I'm going to torture I'm going to torture my subscribers with this, but I want to watch some of the video and kind of and think through this. So okay, here's the let me share it. There we go. Okay, so hopefully there's no technical problems, and let's begin.
Um, but perhaps not something that cuts through what's occurring. But
So Johannes, I'm sorry, yeah, Johannes was just talking about the the apparent attempts to talk about meaning, right? Sense making, and a lot of these recent conversations about that. And basically showing how actually on some level this can be a part of the very thing that's sensed, that apparently those conversations are an attempt to solve or to confront, you know, the world and the meaning crisis and all that stuff, right? And that Johannes was pointing out that it could just be part of the wheel work in some way, and so that's what he means by something that cuts, right? Cuts into that.
I want to understand more the difference between being and beings that is now no longer there, and why that is senselessness, and perhaps also how where you think this occurs, or how this perhaps is connected to what is generally called modernity or Neuzeit in German.
So basically you're asking me to tell you in a nutshell what the entire philosophical tradition is about.
Yeah, I know. we have time.
Yeah. And we don't think about the effect of all of this, because if we start thinking about the effect that we obtain with this, then things will go south. So there is this thing which we can call ontological difference, which is.
So I actually didn't catch that till now. when he's talking about the effect. So Johannes had brought up the danger that I was just referring to, about doing these dialogues, right? About actually doing this on YouTube, that perhaps this could, the danger is that it could become part of the whole Gestalt, basically. And so Ivo Di Gennaro, I think just what he was referring to right there was that, like, if we are concerned with the effect, like a cause and effect, that automatically puts us right in the wheel work. And so what he was just saying is, like, we don't have to be concerned with the effect. If we're not trying to create an effect, which puts us right into a, in a particular paradigm or metaphysics, right? That this conversation is seeking to see, right? So I just caught that. So I thought it was really great. So in some sense, like, there's a way in which we want to think, right? Genuine thinking, I think, isn't trying to cause an effect. It's not trying to solve a problem, right? It's something else.
What the Greeks basically discovered, this is why we have something like philosophy. The Greeks discovered there is not just things, but there is things in the dimension which allows them to show as things. And this dimension which allows things to show as things, the tree as a tree and so on, this they call being. And this showing in the dimension of being, they call aletheia, or which we translate as truth. So for them, something like beings in their being suddenly showed. That was a realization. We don't know where it came from and why it happened. We will never know, but we can just acknowledge that it did happen. And the moment you realize that there is this, as they said, invisible dimension that lets things appear, Plato calls this ideas and so on, simultaneously with this realization comes the awareness of the need of this invisible element to be taken care of in a dedicated form of knowledge, which the Greeks call philosophy. So philosophy is that dedicated form of knowledge which takes care of this dimension, which is beings, yes, but insofar.
Notice the word takes care of that dimension. That seems important.
As they are beings, beings as such, beings in their being, and so on. So this is the ontological difference, and philosophy in its unfolding has never been anything else than the ever renewed attempt to hold open an access for us as human beings, to hold open an access to that dimension, which is the underlying dimension, which is the sense-giving dimension.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is important. So, all right, I just want to say this. So, philosophy, historically, right, is that domain which takes care of the insight or the disclosure of the being of beings. And the being of beings, right, is what gives sense, right? What the fount of intelligibility. It allows beings to appear as beings. So philosophy begins with the pre-Socratics, when somehow, like, who knows exactly how this happened? It was just, they don't know, it just happened. But that's like a big bang, right? It never happened before. And that happening, right, is the beginning of the West. And if that didn't happen, we wouldn't be having this, you wouldn't be watching this video, like the whole West wouldn't have happened without this disclosure of that which the non-apparent source of intelligibility for all appearance, right? The being of beings. It is absolutely, that happened is so unfathomable, Like, it's so unfathomable. And that it happened allowed the very common sense and misconceptions and conceptions and everything that we do in science and everything is all started there. Stunning, right? So philosophy was historically has been that domain which cares for that, right? And cares for it, and literally a caring, sincere, like deeply, deeply serious relationship to tend to that which is the source of sense. All right, I'll get off my soapbox.
This is the tradition of philosophy in a nutshell, okay? Now, clearly, we would have to ask, well, where does it come from that the way in which we look for this axis changes? Well, it comes from the fact that this difference shows itself in changing ways and so on. And we would have to ask, where does that come from? How is that possible that there is transformations here, modifications, which then lead to different philosophies, different philosophical positions? Now,
right there, that those differences he's talking about, right? This different philosophers and philosophies that, you know, why isn't it just with, you know, Heraclitus or Parmenides, right? Where why don't we just still just only read them? Why did it ever change, right? That historical change and the movement of that historical change is what Heidegger somehow thought or saw. That's a whole other thing too. That's almost as big as the seeing of the being of beings.
Again, in a nutshell, what we can observe retrospectively is that, in a sense, this difference becomes, in a way, smaller and smaller. In other words, philosophy has to resort to ever more, in a sense, extreme ways of keeping this axis open. When I say keeping this axis open, or an avenue towards this sense-giving dimension, it's just like the Platonic cave. Philosophy is the knowledge that of the way out. Okay, the way out. That's what philosophy is about. Finding the having a form of knowledge which places us in the habit of, even when we lose it, to ever again find the way out. Because if we don't find the way out, then we just fall into senselessness. That's what the Greeks said. We can't build a polis if we don't have access to this mode of things, not just things. So what we can observe is that
the moreness is what gives sense. It's not the fucking cup. It's not the things that you see. It's the that which makes, arises, and allow those things to appear in the first place. What we're saying and what they're saying is that that's what we mean by senselessness, right? What happens when we lose the sense of the being of the cup, right? What is that? That's our age, and we're oblivious to it.
And German idealism and Nietzsche, so Hegel and Nietzsche, they show us this, how philosophy had to really do desperate things in a way in order to save our relation to that dimension which the Greeks had discovered in their own Greek element, which is not ours anymore. Yeah. And at some point, these attempts happened, Hegel and Nietzsche, and then that was it. After that, in this tradition of philosophy, we don't have substantially new attempts. We have philosophy continues, and there is metaphysical things and so on.
Yeah.
But what?
Okay, attempts, right? The attempts philosophically, right? That domain, which is to care for the very source of sense and to keep it open, right? So the attempt, what he's saying is the attempt of a philosopher is to to keep this open, to keep the being of being, the twofold, right? To keep it open so we have access to it, right? And it's funny, I get the sense from watching the video, and I've never quite seen it quite like this, is that as the historical movement of the understanding of being, right? The historicity of the being of beings, as it unfolded, it did become, you can kind of get it. You see the philosophers getting into more paradoxes, and there's this wrestling to try to keep that open, right? And you get all the way like to Hegel, right? And Hegel's just like, right? He's like standing on his toe. He's like just total abstractions, trying to get the movement of thought and like into to save this the spirit, right? The sense of sense. And that ends up, you know, you could say that Hegel was the culmination and in that sense, the end of metaphysics, right? And there's I know Johannes talks a lot about this, that like you can't, if you look at Hegel, you can't add anything to it because it's a metaphysics of actuality, right? It's, man, it is so complete, right? It is so perfectly complete. You can't really add to Hegel, which is, you could say, if you look at it from this angle, you can kind of get that he's trying to keep it open, but it's kind of like the last one, right? So that's my understanding of what he's saying.
Takes over, and this is what Heidegger describes as the ending of philosophy, ending in the sense of it's of philosophy finding its ultimate form, is that a form of knowledge takes over, yeah, which it doesn't bother about this other dimension, which no longer takes care of this.
It's called analytic philosophy, that thing that doesn't bother with the more, mostly analytic philosophy.
Because it doesn't see it, it doesn't know it. And because this difference has in a way vanished. And what reality is for us.
It's vanished, right? Not only is it vanished, but its vanishing has vanished. That's hell.
It's just this thing which results from this clash of being and beings. So the elimination of this difference. And this is already contingency. And so the forms of knowledge that are based on this contingency and that they take care of this contingency and have this contingency as their objective, namely controlling it, coordinating it, and so on. Those are the modern sciences, yeah. Which is why today the science is the true knowledge. I mean, nobody would ask a philosopher, any kind of fundamental questions. When on the other hand, we know, because of what I said before, that nothing can be decided in the domain of science. No, there is lots of talk about, the big questions, and science tells us the last element of reality and so on, but that just can't happen. I mean, the science cannot answer those questions because it's contained in this dimension of contingency in which everything is just about operative results. Even in the most theoretical of natural sciences, the least applied science, everything is already in terms of this operativity and about figuring out the functioning of these contingent elements in order to fundamentally enhance power. So that is the story of the ontological difference. And clearly, it goes in parallel with what happens to Scholé. So clearly there is no Scholé there, no time, and things that we said before.
And so, okay, I'm going to see if I can get at this thing when he's talking about contingency. So if we say, again, that the source of sense, right, is that which glows in the meaningfulness of the world, that which shines forth as beings, right, that gives us the sense of meaningfulness, the sense of our own being, the sense of being in the world, right? And domain in philosophy is that that domain which cares for keeping that sense open, right? And if that sense closes, right, it collapses that sense, and beings become the same thing. So what the world turns into, right, is something like inert stuff and facts on an assembly line that we calculate in terms of contingencies, that those, in other words, things don't glow from the inside out, right? Instead, kind of like this. It's kind of like, imagine trying to, read this book, and you read it, and you try to understand it by measuring the shapes of the letters. That's not reading the book. You got to read the book, right? You can't like read it through like calculating like how much how much ink takes up the space of the page. But that's actually the way we now try to understand and make sense of the world. It's the way science works, right? And it's become the operative mode of functioning for everything. Everything. And it's getting more and more everything. And what's uncanny about it is because, God, what is it? It's like, well, it's capitalism. It's hyper capitalism, basically. It's like I don't even think I need to explain it. Like just look at how you organize your life. Look at the sense in which life seems to be, I go to college and take these classes which are contingent, right? Are contingencies upon which I then will lead me to the next thing so I can get a job, and I have all these conversations which are contingencies, and there's this kind of sense of a promise that never comes, right? And it never comes because, let's just say it does come. We retire or whatever, right? And this place of now my time is free. I'm still in the same version of time and space. It just means now it's this vessel of this kind of contingent vessel of operative time and space that's now empty, that I call freedom, that you jump in. Now, that's it's not like it's discontingency. Its contingencies go away. I have to create a new contingency. What you know what those are? I just I just visited one. They're called senior citizen communities in Florida.
What's perceived as a crisis of meaning or Sinnlosigkeit, meaninglessness, etc., is connected with that, also with that collapse of those two dimensions into each other.
Yeah, but the thing is, as you said before, what did you say? It doesn't cut through.
Yeah.
The thing is that are we capable of acknowledging that the kind of lack, what is lacking there, that we don't have what in philosophy is, as we call a principle precisely, a point of inception. Schelling says the point of inception of the only free philosophy, or Kant says the highest. So do we feel the need of, if not something like this, or something of that kind, or not? So all the feeling of senselessness, is just okay. Yeah, I can understand that, but either we take it seriously and we experience it fully also, because experiencing the senselessness fully, this is the presupposition for gaining once again, in a way that we don't know what that is, in gaining an access to, let's call it, a point of freedom. Because what we experience as senselessness is the lack of freedom. But if we don't get to the inception of freedom, to that point of freedom, then there is no way out from this.
The inception, the point of freedom. So, okay, what he's saying is that in all of our attempts to address the senselessness in which our lives are perpetuating, let's say, because of this loss of the source of sense, right? Okay, I think what he's saying is he's basically saying, like, okay, right, these attempts to do it that they don't cut at the nub of it. So because they stand on and just become another contingency, I think is what he's saying, right? Or alluding to. So he says what we have to do first, right, is get it, right? Is to experience it, is to see it, be in the presence of it and take it seriously, right? Which I would imagine having kind of hope to get out of it, right? It ends up being it can end up being the attempt to avoid the movement of the unfoldment of being. And I have to say that this is something I struggle with, right? In a lot of the conversations that are going on, right, around this. It seems so good-natured on one level, and the intention, and they're fine, right? It's like they're fine. Like nothing needs to. I don't know what I'm saying exactly, but there's kind of this way of like kind of looking at the world and thinking that we can make it an object, right, to problematize and solve. That is so what is that? That's it seems to let it, first of all, it's an absolute category mistake, right? Like we're born of that very world, and in some sense we can never make it an object. In fact, it's the world that constitutes us forgetting about that and that being possible. It's like it's so deep in us. We cannot control the presuppositions upon which we stand, right? It's the movement of being. It's hard enough to even see, right? Let alone make a problem and solve and act on, right? So anyway, so that, I don't know if I can make any more sense of that, but that's what I'm hearing.
Senselessness. It's a bit the kind of phenomenon that Heidegger calls the real need today is the need of the real want today is the needlessness. So as long as we don't, as we're not shocked, so to speak, vis-a-vis our needlessness of with respect to the senselessness, as long as we do not acknowledge the need that is dormant, so to speak, in this needlessness, which is really the phenomenon of today, our needlessness. Then nothing can begin.
I think what he means is our needlessness, meaning we walk around oblivious to that things are senseless, and we're just in a vat of turning contingencies, right? Our need for sense, our need for ontological shining forth, right? That need we don't see, we don't feel, we don't experience, and we don't see or feel or experience that we don't see or feel or experience it. So it's oblivious. And I think that's what he means, is that the need for the twofold to be open to us, right, is we don't, that's our needlessness that we walk around in. So, okay. So I think what he's saying is to really authentically be in the times that we're in is to really be in it, and to, I guess it's to, in some sense, reckon with our own needlessness, right? The lack of the sense of needing the source of sense. And in seeing that, start to experience its loss, like really experience its destitute, its loss, its lostness. Seriously.
No inception, no thinking, no time, no language, no humanity, and we just roll. We just keep rolling without an awareness of what is happening.
The wheel.
There's a book which came out, I think, in 2014 or 15 by Peter Unger, who's an analytical philosopher. Maybe you've heard of it. It's called Empty Ideas.
No.
And
all right, I am going to stop sharing that. It's got a wave of tiredness, so I think I'm going to stop recording in a moment. But anyways, I just wanted to share that. I just felt like Ivo de Gennaro and his work is in Johannes's work, and it's really getting at the matter that I think gives access to our loss of access. And I think what I'm not saying, because I can feel this voice in the back of my head, what I'm not saying, I don't think what I'm saying, and I don't think what they're saying, is that to be authentically with our times is to be miserable, to be psychologically destitute or something like that. I don't think that the historical movement of the understanding of being which we dwell in oblivion needs my psychology to feel any way about it. So I feel like a pretty ecstatic dude. Like, so I just want to say that, like, I don't think what he's talking about is the psychological needing to be depressed or something, right? In fact, I would say that if we get depressed about this, we're not really seeing it, like, because I think also there's another part of this, and I was been talking with somebody else about this. There's a way in which I've noticed that when you can see the underlying intelligibility of what's unfolding, even if the content of what is unfolding through seeing that, right, is hell, the seeing of which, the unconcealing of it, the truthness of it, right, is a kind of ecstaticness, right? Even if what it's revealing is awful, that there's something about that, because it's interesting as I get in touch with this. There's an ecstatic eeriness about it, right? There's not a personal hopelessness, though. I think that's worthy of a whole conversation in itself. So I just want to mention that that's definitely not what I'm after here, because I find myself a pretty for the most part a pretty more and more satisfied, more and more emotionally peaceful. You know, has always been that way, but it's been that way for a while now, and it keeps growing, and somehow reckoning with this in some way has a lot to do with that personal experience of mine. So, all right, thank you for listening, and have a good night.